Okay, this is a quick review of the 7 Day Shop neutral density filter, variable neutral density filter. I happened upon this when I was just browsing the site, getting some other bits and bobs, and as it was so cheap, I decided to take the plunge on it. I think it was about £28. It is a lot cheaper than the other branded neutral density filters, variable neutral density filters that you will probably come across. Whether it is as good or not, I honestly can't comment on because I haven't directly compared them. But it is certainly very useful, and at the price, from what I've seen, it's definitely worth having a look at it and keeping one in your kit bag, because there is some point at which you will find that it's a very, very useful tool to have there. Why would you use such a thing? Well, if you want to use a very wide open aperture and still have a relatively slow shutter speed, so like 1/50th being roughly the optimum for motion blurring and stuff and getting the filmic look that you want from a DSLR camera, then you'll probably need to cut down the amount of light coming into the camera, because if you're filming in daylight, for sure, you will just get a completely white screen if you record with those settings. Even if you bring the ISO settings right down, it will not be enough to give you a usable light level. So using the neutral density filter, you can cut down the amount of light that's actually getting to the sensor, and a variable neutral density filter allows you to vary how much light you actually cut out. So this allows you to get a very shallow depth of field and keep a filmic look at the same time. It'll also allow you, if you're doing photography, to take long exposures in the daytime if you want motion blurring and that kind of thing, and same with the photography thing, it allows you to use a very wide open aperture if you want a shallow depth of field as well. So I'm going to stand up now and go over to the camera and give you a look at what the filter actually does. I have some test footage that I've done indoors under roughly daylight and outdoors under bright sunlight, so I'll cut those in after this as well. I've got a little Sanyo Exacti here that I'm just going to use to show you what I'm doing as I walk over to the camera. Ooh, kicking GorillaPods around on the floor. So I opted for the 77mm thread on this neutral density filter, basically just because that will allow me to use it with all of my lenses if I get a couple of step-up rings. And on this lens, a Sigma 1.4 30mm, I have to use a step-up ring from the 62mm that it is to the 77mm that the fader is just there. In between, I have a UV filter, that's nothing special, so yeah, don't worry about that. Going over to the back of the camera through the lens, it means nothing because I've got auto gain set on this, so it'll just vary itself. Now if I bring the fader in gradually, ooh, the screen's just decided to shut off at that point. Yep, here we go. Gradually gets darker and darker and darker until we have basically pitch black, and then everything will come back up again like so, and that's probably about wide open with the fader just there. So it allows you to set the optimum light level for your scene, and it also allows you to vary it very, very quickly and very easily, and it's more infinitely variable than any of the other settings. So if you drop the ISO, you're going to be dropping it by quite a large chunk. If you change the aperture size and cut down the amount of light coming into the lens that way, then you're going to change the depth of field. If you bring the shutter speed up, then you're going to affect the look of the image, so you don't get the same motion blurring. You get a much crisper, sharper looking image, which is desirable for some things. So for example, if you're using Twixtor and doing some super slow motion, you'd need to shoot at a very high shutter speed in order to get the really crisp definition between frames that would allow you to do the simulated frames. If you shoot with a very slow shutter speed, comparatively slow, filmic 1/50th, then using Twixtor you get a mess of sort of blurry morphing and all kinds of stuff. It doesn't really work that well. So there are certain stylistic reasons that you would use a high shutter speed, but most of the time if using a DSLR you're probably angling for a stereotypically filmic look with the shallow depth of field and the motion blur. So a variable neutral density filter like this, which is pretty cheap, is a very useful thing to keep in your kit bag. If you wanted to get this, if you are in the UK, I'll put a link below the video, and if you're watching this on the blog, I'll have a link in the blog somewhere as well. I would thoroughly recommend it at the price, and you can't really go wrong with a variable filter for that kind of money. So you need to be a little bit careful if you're using this with a very wide angle lens. I use this with the Tokina 11-16, and that actually creates some slightly odd effects when you bring the filter right in that it makes it very dark in the center and then kind of gradually swings it from side to side. It's rather strange, and if I get a chance I'll cut in some footage of that. I think that that's just a way that the wide angle lens actually reacts to a variable filter. It does it with my variable polarizing filter as well. I think it's actually a documented issue that wide angle lenses have with filters like this. On the lens I'm using at the moment, no problems at all, and on the Canon 50mm, definitely no problems, because on the crop sensor that is actually quite a telephoto lens. So yeah, hope this has been a useful overview, and leave any comments or questions below.